The hallway light flickered as I turned the key in my door, arms full of folders from the client presentation that had run long and tight with tension. The moment I looked down, I saw it, an oversized manila envelope propped against my doormat. Thick and deliberate, my full name, written in my mother's unmistakable cursive. She always wrote in a way that suggested something ceremonial, even when it was cruel. I brought it inside, tossing my coat over the arm of the sofa, fingers already tearing through the adhesive. No note, no explanation, just a stack of documents that fell out and landed with a slap on my glass coffee table. The top page was a formal invoice. Tesla Model Y, metallic gray, fully loaded. Total $63.14.75. Under purchaser was my brother's name, Caspian Elwood. Under co-signer mine. The rest of the paperwork was there. Financing terms, insurance forms, a maintenance plan, all of it. I flipped each page, my breath flattening my fingers, clumsy. Then I saw it, my forged signature curling in a shape close enough to pass a glance, but not mine. My chest went still. For a few minutes I didn't move. The hum of my refrigerator was suddenly loud, like static against bone. I sat down slowly, documents scattered like evidence across my lap. My name, my credit, my responsibility signed away without my knowledge. I didn't need to guess why. Caspian had always needed saving, and my parents had always assumed I'd do it. Just last week, I saw the Instagram post. My cousin Gentry had uploaded a filtered photo of everyone gathered at my parents' place in Charleston, Poinsettias. Hot toddies, the early Elwood Christmas. Everyone smiling. Everyone there except me. No invitation, no call, not even a text. I was left out completely, and now they wanted me to foot the bill for a car I never saw, never drove, never even heard about. I set the papers aside, walked to the kitchen, and turned on the kettle out of reflex. I didn't want tea. I just needed something to do with my hands. My mind was already going back in time, tracing all the small signs I'd ignored, all the ways they'd trained me to stay quiet and useful. The kettle hissed behind me, but I didn't move. I stood at the counter staring at nothing, and my mind slipped into that familiar, involuntary place, back behind the iron gates of the Elwood estate. Our house in Charleston looked like something out of a magazine, symmetrical, immaculate, framed by white columns and perfectly trimmed hedges. It smelled like lavender, polish, and money. From the outside, it was enviable. From the inside, it was performance. My mother used to say we were Elwoods, not amateurs. That meant smiles in public, quiet in private, and always looking like things were under control, especially if they weren't. Caspian had charm from the moment he could speak. At 6, he was already a miniature version of our father, bold, shiny, unruly, in a way that adults found endearing. I, on the other hand, colored inside the lines, took my assignment seriously, and memorized vocabulary lists for fun. By the time I was 16, I was tutoring myself in calculus at night, while Caspian was sneaking out with my father's credit card and wrecking his second BMW. When he came home reeking of tequila and bad decisions, my parents sighed like he was a weather event, unavoidable and natural. They paid for the damages, and my mother bought him a new leather jacket to lift his spirits. When I brought home straight A's and a STEM scholarship offer, my father glanced up from his tablet and said, "Good. Expected." They called me the serious one like it was an affliction. Every time I tried to talk about feelings or asked why I was treated differently, I was told I needed to be more grateful, that Caspian had more emotional needs, and I was lucky not to require as much attention. That became the foundation of our dynamic. He was loved out loud. I was tolerated, provided I stayed useful. I internalized the formula quickly. Do more, ask less. Perform well, expect nothing. Love was something to earn, not receive. Approval had to be calculated and maintained like a ledger. I didn't realize how much that accounting would follow me into adulthood until the first time they asked for money. The first time they asked me for money, I told myself it was temporary. Caspian had dropped out of Tulane mid-semester again, and my father said it was a strategic pause. My mother called that evening with a voice wrapped in syrup. "He just needs a little breathing room, darling. You know how brilliant he is when he's focused. Could you help with tuition so he doesn't lose the credits?" It wasn't a question. I wired the funds that night. I told myself it was a one-off, that it was family. That was 10 years ago. Since then, the pattern had formed and solidified. Caspian's temporary needs became full-fledged lifestyle dependencies. My parents stopped pretending the requests were rare. I was the dependable one, the one with a salary and a Roth IRA and a stable apartment. They never said it outright, but I could hear it in the subtext of every call. "You have more, so you should give more." It wasn't just Caspian. 3 years ago, my parents called about a shortfall on their second mortgage. "It's just timing," my father said. "The liquidity isn't lining up with the contractor's deadline for the patio addition." That patio ended up in the Southern Living. I ended up with another 5 figures quietly pulled from my savings. They never said thank you. What they said was, "It's good to know we can count on you." Last year, Caspian called in tears. He'd racked up $9,000 in credit card debt trying to stabilize. He swore it was his rock bottom. "I just need one clean slate, Sarah, please." I transferred the money. 1 week later, he posted photos from Coachella VIP wristband boutique hotel. 2 new tattoos. I stopped trying to confront them. When I hinted at boundaries, my mother would get quiet and say, "We don't ask much considering all we've done for you." It was never a demand. It was a performance. I gave in over and over, believing that one day they'd see me. One day they'd give back. Instead, they took more. And then they left me out entirely. It was a Tuesday night when I saw it. I just finished finalizing the shipment on Gifts monogrammed robes for my aunts, a limited edition vinyl for Caspian, a curated wine box for my parents. I'd even booked my flight to Charleston, thinking maybe this year I'd get there early enough to help my mother with the centerpieces she always pretended to arrange last minute. Scrolling Instagram was supposed to be a wind down, not a gut punch. There it was. A photo from my cousin Blythe's feed, Lenore Elwood's annual tree lighting party. The caption read, "Elwood Magic Early Christmas with the whole gang." The whole gang stood smiling in their coordinated outfits, mugs of cider in hand, beneath the chandelier I once helped hang after an ice storm. Caspian was front and center, laughing with our uncles. My mother beamed beside my father, who held a tumbler of bourbon like it was a family crest. There were no empty chairs, no accidental gaps where someone had simply not arrived yet. I blinked, trying to make sense of it, then double-checked the date on the post. It had gone up 3 days ago. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring with a rehearsed lilt. "Darling, how are you, Mom?" I said evenly. "Why didn't anyone tell me about the party?" A pause. Then lightly, "Oh, it was just a last-minute thing. Nothing formal. You're always so busy with work, and Caspian mentioned you had other plans. We didn't want to stress you." "I didn't say that," I replied. "I never told him anything like that." She sighed. "Serafina, don't be dramatic. It wasn't intentional. Jessica from the garden club stopped by, and it turned into something bigger. You'll be here for Christmas Day, won't you?" Her tone made it sound like a favor I might be lucky enough to grant. I mumbled something non-committal and hung up. The air in my apartment felt sharp, too quiet. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. The next morning, the envelope with the Tesla invoice arrived. I gave myself a full 24 hours before picking up the phone. I needed that time to move past disbelief, to let the sharp edge of betrayal settle into something I could speak through. When I finally called, my father answered on the first ring, voice clipped and impersonal, like I was a vendor following up on a late invoice. "Serafina," he said, "I figured we'd hear from you. I didn't agree to co-sign anything I said, skipping pleasantries." "We assumed you'd step up," he replied. "Caspian's got this pitch coming up, big potential. You know how important presentation is. The Tesla helps. You forged my name. He didn't deny it. Your mother handled the paperwork. It was easier that way. I pressed my fingers into my temple, trying to slow the fury blooming there. You understand that's illegal, right? Fraud. Not just inconsiderate, not just entitled, criminal. Don't be dramatic, he said, his tone sliding into condescension. It's family. We've always supported each other. No, I've supported you. There was a long pause. Then he muttered, if this is about that Christmas nonsense, your mother already explained. I ended the call without saying goodbye. 10 minutes later, an email from my mother appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "Let's not forget who we are." The body was a rambling, poetic mess of nostalgia and guilt, childhood memories, family holidays, how my coldness was hurting Caspian's momentum, how my success had made me rigid, detached. She closed with a paragraph that read like a benediction. We raised you with values. Please remember them now when your brother needs you most. I sat in silence for a long time after reading it. Then I pulled the folder from the kitchen counter and went through every page again. The signature wasn't a misunderstanding. The loan was real. The debt was live. And they weren't sorry. They were counting on my silence banking on the same exhausted loyalty that had always kept me in check. But something in me had shifted. Quietly, finally, for good. The next day, I changed every password I had. I started with the basics, froze my credit reports, enabled two-factor authentication, changed every login I could think of. I wasn't just reacting, I was bracing. The forged signature had rattled something loose in me, a kind of hyper-awareness that made every digital ping feel like a warning bell. I logged into my bank account to scan for anything unusual, even though I hadn't seen any alerts. That's when I saw it, a flagged login attempt from 2 days ago, denied, originating from a device labeled MacBook Pro SE, the name of the laptop I had given my parents last year when I upgraded. My throat went dry. I clicked deeper. The attempt came at 10:42 p.m., 2 hours after I'd hung up on my father. They hadn't just forged my signature. They'd tried to get into my savings account, the one I'd quietly built over years for a down payment, the one no one knew existed except them. I closed my laptop and sat still, the kind of stillness that comes when your body refuses to move because it knows movement will make the grief sharper. This wasn't about emotional blackmail anymore. It wasn't about Caspian's startup or their hurt feelings over a Christmas visit. This was theft, calculated, deliberate, and ugly. I stood up and paced once across the room, then grabbed my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in years, Delia Franks. She'd been a friend of a friend at a dinner party, once a no-nonsense attorney with a soft voice and a steel trap memory. I remembered her because she'd mentioned identity theft cases and how most of them came from inside families. I left her a voicemail brief and even, "Hi, Delia. This is Serafina Elwood. I think my family just committed fraud in my name, and I think they're trying to do more." I ended the call, locked my phone, and stood by the window watching dusk settle over the city like ash. My trust had been eroded in layers, but this was the layer that cracked all the way through. The next day, they invited me to dinner. Delia called back the next morning. Her voice was as calm as I remembered her questions, sharp but never rushed. After I laid out the timeline invoice, forged signature login attempt, she paused, then said, "They'll likely escalate. If they feel control slipping, they'll reach for theatrics. Let them, but document everything. And don't confront them alone unless you want to bait the truth out in person." That invitation to dinner arrived less than 4 hours later. A text from my mother. "Let's not let lawyers ruin Christmas. Come eat with us. Talk like family. Sunday at 6. I went. Their house looked exactly the same. The wreath on the front door was real pine, freshly trimmed. Candles flickered in the windows. It was a portrait of Grace until the door opened and I saw my mother's face stretched tight with performative warmth. She pulled me into a quick, practiced hug. "Oh, darling, I've made your favorite lemon roast chicken." It was Caspian's favorite. I hadn't touched chicken in years. Inside, Caspian lounged at the head of the dining table like a prince mid-coronation, scrolling his phone with one hand and sipping something neat with the other. My father stood by the fireplace, expression unreadable, a tumbler in his grip. I sat. We made it halfway through the meal, my mother dabbing her eyes, my father making passive remarks about family unity, Caspian smirking like none of it touched him. Then I laid my fork down. I know about the forged signature, I said, and the login attempt from my old laptop. The room stilled the way a pond does before a storm. My mother's napkin froze mid-lap. Caspian snorted, then muttered, "Here we go. I'm not your silent partner anymore," I said quietly. "If you want to talk like family, let's start with honesty." My father's jaw twitched, the only sign he'd heard me. No denial, no apology. Just that hollow look I knew too well, the one that meant they were already calculating their next move. I smoothed my dress and excused myself. On the drive home, I called Delia and said I'm ready. The next morning, I brewed coffee like any other day. The sun was rising behind the blinds, soft and indifferent. I sat down with my laptop, found the customer service line for the auto lender, and dialed. A woman named Carla answered. Her voice was warm, too calm for what I was about to say. I explained everything, how I'd received the invoice, how I never signed, how the signature on the paperwork wasn't mine. She asked for copies, which I'd already scanned. I emailed them while we were still on the call. She was quiet for a moment after reviewing the attachments. Then, "Thank you, Ms. Elwood. Based on this information, we'll escalate to our fraud team. If they confirm forgery, we'll remove your name from the loan and proceed accordingly. That usually means repossession." She said it like she was describing the weather. "Thank you," I said, then hung up and stared at the wall for a full minute. It felt like pressing a detonator and waiting for the dust to rise. The dust arrived just after 8 a.m. Voicemail after voicemail from Caspian. First indignant, then frantic, then furious. "You're seriously doing this? I needed that car. They're coming for it today. What the hell is wrong with you? You want to ruin me for what, a signature?" By noon, I had blocked him. Then my parents, then a rotating cast of cousins and extended relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, each one suddenly offering unsolicited advice about letting things go and not turning this into a scandal. I made myself lunch, ate in silence. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for no particular reason and sat at the kitchen table with a blank notebook. On the first page, I wrote the word reset in block letters. Then I started listing what needed to be changed: bank accounts, beneficiaries, locks, passwords. There was something almost ceremonial about it. By the time I blew out the candle on the table, I knew what I had to do next. The Tesla was repossessed during lunch at the country club. Caspian had just posted a photo of his shrimp cocktail when, according to one of his friends, a flatbed rolled into the valet circle. Two suited men, polite but firm. He tried to argue. They pointed to the documents. 15 minutes later, the car was gone and Caspian was still yelling into his phone, while other members pretended not to watch. By evening, he was unraveling online. The first post was passive-aggressive, something about betrayal and bloodlines. Then came the tags. Photos of the car, old selfies of us from years ago, quotes ripped from self-help blogs about toxic siblings. He called me a snake, a manipulator, a parasite. His followers, mostly people who didn't know me, flooded the comments with fire emojis and pity. I didn't reply. I didn't even look beyond the screenshots my friend Nora sent me with a single text, "Are you okay?" But the real escalation came from Lenore. She started calling my office line, leaving clipped voicemails for my boss's assistant. Then she took it further. She reached out to the head of HR, claiming concern over my sudden erratic behavior and hinted that I might be struggling with paranoia, possibly due to trauma. Sandra, my boss, called me in that afternoon. She closed the door, slid her phone across the desk so I could hear the voicemail, then looked at me carefully. "You don't have to explain anything. You don't want to," she said. "But if this is how your family fights, I want you to know you're not alone. and you're not the problem." I blinked, then nodded once. I didn't realize how tight my chest had been until her words made it ease. "Don't let people steal your clarity," she added, "family or not." That night, I turned my phone back on after a few hours of quiet. One unread text sat waiting from a number I didn't recognize. It was from my Uncle Lowell. "They did the same thing to your cousin Lyle. You're not crazy. You're the first one who didn't fold." I read it twice, then locked my phone and turned out the light. 6 months passed, like the slow unthawing of something that had been frozen for too long. By summer, the paperwork was complete. My name was cleared from the auto loan, my credit fully restored, every bank account restructured and sealed behind new passwords and two-factor gates. I even moved my savings into an institution they'd never heard of. The silence was jarring at first. No passive-aggressive texts. No forwarded voicemails from extended family. No sudden calls about property tax shortfalls or Caspian's next chapter. Just space, air, stillness. I hadn't realized I'd been craving. Work felt different, too. I was no longer bracing for chaos. I found myself mentoring junior engineers, rediscovering a satisfaction in collaboration I hadn't felt in years. I volunteered for a panel on women in tech without second-guessing whether I had the energy. It turned out I did. I spent Thanksgiving in Colorado with Nora and her sister's family. They made too much food, argued over board games, and laughed until they cried over things no one remembered the next day. I brought pie and didn't have to explain anything about myself. That was the gift. Christmas came and went. No message from Lenore. No invitation. I took a solo trip to Taos, hiked every morning, read paperbacks in a sunlit cabin, and slept like I hadn't since college. One evening in late January, I was clearing out old files on my laptop when a message popped up from an unsaved number. Caspian. It was one line. "You were right." I stared at it for a long time, not in pain, not in triumph, just observation. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't apologize. He simply acknowledged what I'd known all along, that I'd seen it coming, that I'd acted when no one else had the courage to. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed the message, then the laptop. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the apartment, clean, quiet, filled with things I'd chosen for myself. The girl who had kept forgiving them out of habit had left the room months ago. I didn't miss her.